Scottish rugby depth chart for 2024, folks. We're going to have a look at Gregor Townsend's boys for the 2024 year, just to see how Gregor has used his players, which guys have been getting which minutes and which positions, where are they looking pretty settled, where are things a little bit more unsteady. We'll go through the guys. You guys can let us know your thoughts on how this squad is stacking up. And it's an interesting one. I've been looking forward to do the Scottish one because they've just used so many players. Only the French used more players than the Scots. You had so many guys making their debut. Nathan Macbeth, Robbie Smith, Freddie Douglas, Ross McCann, Tom Jordan. The list goes on and on and on of the bunch of guys who've got their first start for Scotland in 2024. Gregor's building some depth, but yeah, we'll go through it and you guys can let us know where you reckon they are at. We've had a look at a few of the squads already, the likes of the All Blacks, the Springboks, the French, as I mentioned already, the Pumas. They're all up. The Irish, different coaches doing things in different ways. So for context, check out that playlist. But let's get into the Scots. We will start with the front row, 1, 2, and 3. Loosehead prop, if you're looking at the chunks of different colours representing different players. The blue chunk at number 1, loosehead prop, that's Piers Scrum. So he has over half of the game time in 2024. He is the first choice guy in his position. And then Rory Sutherland is there in white behind him. So between those guys, you're looking at around about 80% of the game time. The other three, the grey, the purple, and the green, is Nathan Macbeth, Alec Hepburn, and Jamie Batty. So they've been kind of living off scraps that have been left behind by the main two guys, Schoeman and Sutherland. Schoeman, I think, is like 30 years old. So in terms of propping stocks, he's kind of coming into his prime. You feel like he's going to be a difficult guy to displace, but it is pleasing to see some other guys get some chances, and he's not got as much kind of soul minutes put him. Like if you look at the Irish one, there's a lot of minutes in like Andrew Porter. This is a lot more an even break compared to like the Irish one, but there's no perfect way to do things. Each coach has their own strategy between cohesion and rotation, that's for sure. Hooker is also one that's seen a fair few guys have a go. Ewan Ashman is there in blue with just under 40% of the game time in the 2024 season. George Turner behind him in white. And then Dylan Richardson, who's one of those kind of unique utility guys who covers two genuinely quite different positions in hooker and flanker. You've also got Jamie Dobby, who we'll get to later on, who covers like halfback and wing. So Scotland's one of the few sides who has that kind of versatility. The Box obviously used to have it with Dion Fourie doing the same thing with flanker and hooker, so it's not unheard of. Bit of a South African connection with Dylan Richardson as well, but those are your three kind of starting hookers. Then you got the final, 15% of the game time divided by Patrick Harrison there in purple, Robbie Smith there in green, and then Johnny Matthews with the slightest little sliver at the top. I feel like a lot of Scottish fans would like to see that guy get a bit more game time because he's an absolute try-scoring machine at club level, but yeah, he seems to be a little bit down the pecking order. There's been a kind of few reasons I think he's been out of the squad at times, but yeah, he is also no spring chicken in terms of if they are going to get him involved. I mean, he could certainly go through the next World Cup cycle, no problem at all, being a front rower. But if Gregor is looking to invest minutes into younger bodies, you can see why maybe he doesn't go with Matthews. But I wish Johnny Matthews had more than just that little black sliver there. But I mean, for the main three guys, you'd also say it's a nice distribution of game time. And then Xander Fagerson there in number 3, just over half the game time. I think he's only 28 as well. He's very important for the Scottish game. You think he's like a genuinely very good. I mean, I know people go on about the penalties that he gives away, but props give away penalties. I feel like Xander is getting his penalty count down. I'll have to look at his stats to see if that's actually the case or if that's just my gut feeling. But yeah, Xander is really important at tight head to keep that scrum up. And then there's nobody behind him. Like if you look at loosehead and hooker, the secondary guy gets at least a quarter of the game time for the year. There's nobody else at tight head who gets even a fifth of the game time. So highlights again Xander Fagerson's importance. You got Miller Mills in white, Will Hurd there in grey, Javin Sebastian in purple, Murphy Walker there in green, and then Darcy Ray back into the squad. there in black. So there's yet to really emerge, I guess, in terms of the game time selection, the regular second choice tighthead for Scotland at this point. So that is the front row. You might say Xander Fagerson is the most important guy in terms of his position, but I mean, if you're just going by how many minutes they got in their position, it's Skooma. But as I said, Skooman's backups have had bigger chunks in terms of Sutherland anyway. If we're looking at the locks, number 4 and number 5, Grant Gilchrist there, your tight head lock at number 4. He's also played a little bit in number 5, but he's got just over 40% of the game time there in blue. Scott Cummings is there in the number 5 jersey, also in blue. So those two guys have been a very regular locking duo in the Scottish second row. For number 4, the second guy is Max Williamson, who's another one of the kind of newcomers who actually did really well to get around about a quarter of the game time. So that's pleasing to see a guy kind of go from outside of the squad to being a relatively regular appearer. Alex Craig, Sam Skinner, Alex Samuel, Ewan Johnson, and even a bit of Richie Gray. I know he made himself unavailable kind of towards the end of the year, which I think Gregor Townsend was none too pleased with. But yeah, you've had certainly a lot of guys have a go in that side of the second row. And then for number 5, behind Cummings' big blue chunk, which is over 60% of the game time, you got Ewan Johnson, who I also mentioned on the other side. Gregor Brown, who's another one of the newcomers. Glenn Young, Grant Gilchrist also appears on that side too. And then Alex Craig there at the top. So there's a number of guys who play both sides. It's not totally uncommon for locks to go tight head lock, loose head lock. There's a few locks around the world who kind of specialize. They always come in on one side or the other. But yeah, there's a lot of guys behind Gilchrist and Cummings who've gotten decent chunks of game time. I still miss the Johnny Gray days, just because of his kind of tackling machine aspect. It was kind of his unique selling point. But yeah, Cummings and Gilchrist have certainly been doing a job in the 2024 season. And then the back row, which you do feel like is an area of depth for Scotland, but not only Scotland. You can look at most of the countries, to be honest, even outside Tier 1, and they've got a lot of good back rowers. I would say across the board, it's probably the most competitive area of the game. I'm not sure why that is, because of maybe the body shape not being quite as a kind of unique skill set as like the build of a prop or the build of a lock. The loosies can be a bit more versatile. I don't know. But like the Georgians have got good loosies, the Japanese have got good loosies, the Italians have got great loosies, the Scots are no exception. They've also got good loosies. But looking at number 6, that's a really interesting one to see no one guy. Like look at number 7. That's Rory Darge. Rory Darge, 60+% of the game time. He's dominant there. He's taken over from the Mish, Hamish Watson, and basically put him out of a job. So Rory Darge is absolutely dominant. He's the number 1 forward of all the Scottish guys to put a claim on one jersey number as his own. 63. I made it out to be 63% of the game time this year in the number 7 jersey was Rory Darge, which is more than any other forward had in one particular position. So behind him is like Jamie Ritchie. Behind him is Ben Muncaster, Luke Crosby, Dylan Richardson, as I mentioned. And then Matt Fagerson and the teenager Freddie Douglas have also had a bit of game time. But the 7 jersey is largely about Rory Darge, quite rightly so. I mean, I'm a stats guy. I've been looking at his stats for Yonks, and I can see why he put Hamish Watson out of a job. And I've been a great supporter, backer of Hamish Watson ever since before the last Lions tour. That guy's had a phenomenal career in his own right, but Darge is rightly at 7. But then 6, the blue chunk is Jamie Ritchie, just over a fifth of the game time, not even a quarter. Then Matt Fagerson, very similar game time. Then Luke Crosby, then Andy Christie, then Gregor Brown, from blue all the way up to green. So all these guys, 22%, 22%, 21%, that kind of thing. There's not been any kind of one dominant guy. Like Jamie Ritchie is a little bit of a versatile one, that he's the number 1 6 and he's the number 2 7. He is not like a traditional out-and-out number 6, right? He's not like when I think traditional number 6, I'm thinking like Jerome Kaino from the All Blacks, to bring it always back to a New Zealand perspective. But that's where my brain goes when I'm thinking number 6. You could think blindside flanker like Peter Steph Dutoy, big man. Like Jamie Ritchie is certainly high work rate. He seems like more of a 7 in the way he plays, but hey, that is what it is. Josh Bayless and Rory Darge, those kind of tiny little slivers there at the top. And then number 8 is a lot more, and I think potentially in terms of like a healthy breakdown of first, second, third, number 8 seems virtually like if you were gonna say like what the model is for a depth chart, I think number 8's pretty much it. Jack Dempsey there with just under half the game time, your first choice number 8. Matt Fagerson there in white with just under a third of the game time, and Josh Bayless there with around about a quarter of the game time. First choice, second choice, third choice. That seems nice. Nobody's on token minutes. Nobody's got so few minutes that they are kind of, as I said, not really that much worth their salt, but also not so invested in one guy that if you were to lose him, it would be kind of calamitous. It looks nice and healthy. It's great that you've got Fagerson and Dempsey, who are both cracking players, competing for that number 8 jersey. That's what I mean. And then, as I said, Bayless there as well. So that is the forwards for the Scots. As I said, there's been a bunch of newcomers in the 2024 season. Looking into the backs, Ben White is there in number 9 with well less than half the game time, followed by George Horn, who's had not quite a third. Be nice to see George Horn get a few more minutes, but also Ben White may have more if he wasn't playing abroad, because remember the fact that he plays his rugby for his French club means any of those games outside the test window he is unavailable. So it's White in blue, helpfully enough, and then Horn, who is in the colour white. Jamie Dobby there, as I mentioned, the kind of versatile winger or scrum half come winger there in grey. Gus Waugh is another one of the newcomers in terms of his Scottish career there in purple, and then Ali Price, whose Scottish stocks, I guess, have fallen a wee bit. He is there in green. I forget if he spent much of the season injured, but that is the way it goes. Some teams have used fewer number 9s than that for sure. So it is also, you feel like a decent break. The fact you got Ali Price as your 5th choice guy, he's still a pretty experienced campaigner to call up on if there was to be an injury crisis at number 9. And then number 10, Finn Russell there in blue. He's had over half the game time. He's another one whose minutes may be further increased if he was playing his rugby in Scotland, but he's not, so he's ineligible for some of the games. Adam Hastings there in white with around about a quarter. And then Ben Healy there in grey, whose stocks seem to have fallen pretty dramatically, even for his club. So it's going to be an interesting storyline to follow if he can kind of get back to where he was in terms of his spot in the pecking order. Ross Thompson and then a little sliver of Tom Jordan there at the top in 10 with Finn Russell in town. It's hard to see anybody displacing him in the short term anyway. The midfield, you feel like, is another proper area of strength. Lions tour selection is going to be really interesting, but the Scottish midfielders have been in cracking form. Number 12, Sione Tuipulotu, more than half the game time. He's now the captain, so you can expect him to get even more minutes. Stafford McDowell, probably if he was playing for any other team which wasn't so stacked in midfielders, would have more than that, just under a third he's got in white. Cam Redpath is also there in grey, so that's also 3 good guys to have. Redpath tends to have injury disruptions. I can't remember how many times he was available or not. He always seems to be kind of in and out of the injury ward, unfortunately. Seems to be one of those players. He'd probably have more if he wasn't always injured. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he wasn't injured that much this season. It's just I feel like he always is. Hugh Jones there in 13. 70-odd% of the game time. His combination with Tuipulotu has been important. And he's been very important in that midfield. Not many positions do the Scots go that deep, just given how much rotation they've done. You've also had Matt Curry, who's come onto the scene. You've had Kyle Stain start one game against Chile at 13 for the Scots this year. He's also kind of, that utility who can fill in at 13 if needs be. Rory Hutchinson is a guy, he's there in purple. Classy player. You feel like, again, in a team which wasn't so stacked in the midfield, might get more game time. A bit of Stafford McDowell and Tuipulotu when they've had to shuffle in a pinch. But, yeah, between Tuipulotu, Jones, McDowell, and then Redpath and Curry and whatnot, Hutchinson, yeah, that's a good headache for Gregor Townsend to have. And then you get to the back 3, and Duhan van der Merwe has had more game time in his position than any single Scottish player throughout all the positions. Just under 80% of the game time. He went on the Tour of the Americas, so he wasn't rested. He did have a yellow card in, I think, one of the Six Nations games. I've kind of discounted those minutes, removed them, but it's basically him and then Aaron Reid. So Duhan's been there for pretty much all the big games. And then Aaron Reed. So just two guys. Two guys on the left wing. That one is a pretty simple one if you're just kind of discarding any card minutes out the window with Duhan getting yellow carded late in one of the games. Right wing is a little bit more of a mix. Kyle Steyn, he's obviously spent a bit of time out injured towards the end of the year. He's there in blue. Darcy Graham, he's there in white. He's also missed a lot of game time towards the earlier part of the year. Between those two guys, you feel like you're pretty well stocked on the right wing. And then you've also got Kyle Rowe, Jamie Dobby, Blair Kinghorn, and then Hugh Jones and Ross McCann have played there for kind of pretty minimal game times. I think Hugh Jones we ended up on the right wing against Fiji. There are times when the guys shuffle. Sometimes I keep the minutes in if there's a shuffle, but sometimes I discard them. Like I think Matt Fagerson locked a scrum at one point. I think Sione Tuipulotu packed down on the blind side at one point. Those ones I kind of just discard. When it's a proper positional change, I will include it. Fullback is a pretty even split between Kinghorn there in blue. There's another one playing his rugby abroad, so not always available. Kyle Rowe there in white. Harry Patterson, who spent a bit of time injured as well, probably would have had at least one more game in him. There in grey, and then Tom Jordan, who's had a bit of a cracking start to his Scottish career. There in purple, that little slice at the top is Kyle Steyn, when he slotted, I think it was to fullback against Canada, but not his kind of usual position. But yes, though nowhere in kind of as not much as Duhan in fullback or right wing, which are a lot more kind of mixed. So if you're looking at the Scottish squad overall, Duhan on the left wing, Hugh Jones at centre, Rory Darge on the open side flank, Scott Cummings. These are probably your guys going deepest into the minutes, and then your two props, Schoeman and Xander Fagerson. That's kind of the core of the squad that the rest of the team is built around. But then, as I mentioned, guys like Finn Russell, like Blair Kinghorn, like Ben White, they'd certainly have more minutes if they were available for more games. But in a way, it's nice that they're not always available outside the test window, so they can give some of the other guys a crack at the starting lineup. Speaking of the starting lineup, these depth chart videos, I actually got the idea for them from a channel called the 1014 years ago. It's no longer an active channel, but their theory was the starting guy, as you build into a World Cup cycle, should have half of the game time. So regular enough that they're getting good minutes alongside their teammates, but not so over-reliant that if they get injured, you are in a pickle, as I mentioned. Scotland are pretty much at that 50% mark for their starters. So 50% of the game time goes to the starters, which is actually on the lower end of the scale. Like Wales are at 49 and France are at 42. France made even more changes than Scotland throughout this year in terms of the number of players they used. So very similar to South Africa. South Africa is 51%. Whereas you got a team like Ireland who give their starting guys a lot more game time. They rotate less. They played fewer games than a lot of other teams, to be fair, but Ireland rotate less and the starters tend to play deeper. Scotland at 50%, at least if those 10-14 guys have got things correct, is a pretty healthy place to be. And as I mentioned, if you're looking at the players used, Scotland are second in 2024, only behind France. They use 60 players. And as I mentioned, a number of debutants into the Scottish side. France were at 75, but remember, like, they don't just change things up. Like the Scots rested a few players for their tour of the Americas. The French basically rested the entire starting 15 or 23. The South Africans are at 50. Teams like New Zealand and Ireland are way at the lower end of the scale, only using 40 players. So Scotland blooded a lot of players, which if we're still a few years out from the World Cup, you would feel like is a good investment for the future. The most picked starting 15 this year would be a front row of Schoeman, Ashman and Fagerson. Schoeman's the only guy in his 30s of that lot, so you feel like they're going to get better. Cummings and Gilchrist in the second row. Gilchrist the oldest guy, and he's the oldest regular starter at 34. Cummings is still in his late 20s. Ritchie, Darge and Dempsey as the kind of starting back row. I mean, Darge is only 24. He's going to get better. Ritchie at 28, you would feel like is coming into kind of his peak career moment as well. But he'll have to survive the challenge from some other pretty good loosies. And Dempsey there at 30 is the oldest regular starting back rower. White and Russell at 26 and 32. Russell is the kind of most senior of the starting backs. The Hugh Pelotsu combo is 27 and 31. So you feel like they've still got a few good years to go together. And then Duhan, Kyle Steyn, and then Blair Kinghorn. I don't want to say it's an old back three because Duhan's 29, Kyle Steyn's 30, and Kinghorn is 27. But there are other teams who like to chuck really young wingers in there and whatnot. But yeah, they've been pretty consistent. Then Darcy Graham probably challenges Kyle Steyn, but Kyle Steyn also has been very consistent. So yeah, that is the Scottish side for 2024. You guys let us know where they're at. They seem to be in an interesting position, kind of floating just below the top 4-ish sides, because they didn't beat they didn't take any big scalps like of the biggest teams in 2024. But you feel like they are a cut above some of the teams below them at the moment, and they've done well to improve their depth. So it'd be nice to see them kick on in 2025. But you guys let us know your thoughts. If you want any British and Irish Lions gear, by the way, because I'm sure some of these guys will be wearing that gear in 2025, check the link down in the description. I'm an affiliate of the British and Irish Lions store, wouldn't you know? So if you click that link, it lets them know that 2 Cents Rugby is the one that sent you there. So check out their gear for the holiday season. You guys take care, and yes, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.